She doesn't need that house anymore. It's too much for one person. My daughter said it the way she says everything. Certain, clean, final. Like a fact that had already been decided before anyone thought to mention it to me. I was standing 2 feet away, on the other side of the mudroom door, still holding a bag of groceries I'd gone out to fetch before any of them arrived. I'd come back early because I forgot the cranberries. That was all. 40 minutes round trip, and I came home to find my son's truck already in the driveway and voices loud in the kitchen. I thought they were surprising me. I thought they'd come early to help. I stood in the mudroom with the cold still on my coat and listened. She could get a nice place, my son said. One of those communities, activities, people her own age. She'd fight it, my daughter said. She fights everything, his wife added. A pause. Then a small laugh. The kind that means everyone agrees, but nobody wants to be the one to say it. We could list the house in the spring, my daughter said. Split whatever's left after the facility costs. That seems fair. I waited to hear if my son would push back. He didn't. I picked up the bag of groceries, walked into the kitchen, smiled when they all turned around. You're early, I said. We wanted to help, my daughter said, and kissed my cheek. I put the cranberries on the counter. I have been in this house for 31 years. My husband and I moved in when our daughter was 9 and our son was 6. Driving up in a borrowed truck he swore he could handle. He couldn't. He took out the mailbox on the first pass and had to reset it in the dark while I stood in the yard laughing so hard I had to sit down on the lawn. We talked about that night for years. He's been gone 7 years now. When he died, people told me to sell. Too big for one person, too many stairs, too much upkeep. I ignored them the way I ignore most advice that arrives dressed as concern but smells like inconvenience. I stayed. I planted the vegetable garden out back that my husband had been meaning to get to for 15 years and never did. I learned to run the snowblower myself. I learned which circuit breaker controlled the kitchen lights. I learned how to be alone without disappearing. I worked 32 years as a school librarian. I know what it means to take stock of what you have, organize it carefully, and hold on to what matters. That evening, I cooked the meal they'd come for and served it on time, and refilled the breadbasket twice, and laughed at my son-in-law's joke about the football game. After the dishes were done and my children had settled into their old rhythms around the living room, I went upstairs to my room, closed the door quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed. Nobody noticed I'd left. In the morning, before anyone else was up, I went down to the kitchen and made coffee. Real coffee, not the half-caff my doctor had suggested, and my daughter liked to remind me about. I sat at the table with my mug and a small notebook I kept in the drawer under the phone. I opened it to a fresh page. I have always kept records, not from suspicion, from habit. 32 years of managing a school library teaches you that things go missing when they aren't tracked, so I tracked. The year my daughter's roof needed replacing after a storm. I paid the contractor's deposit before she'd finished asking. $12,000. She paid me back $1,100, 2 years later after I stopped mentioning it. The 14 months my son was between jobs, I covered his family's health insurance every month without a word. His wife sent me a Thanksgiving card with a garden center gift card tucked inside. Like that closed the account. The down payment on my daughter's second car. My grandson's braces. 3 years of summer camp for my granddaughter. Because she was shy and her parents thought it might help and didn't want to spend the money. There were smaller things too. The kind that don't appear on any statement. Driving 40 minutes each way to watch my grandkids when the sitter canceled. Sitting up with my son on the phone at midnight when his marriage hit a rough patch. Not saying I told you so, though I could have. Skipping my own dentist appointments. The year money was thin, so I could afford birthday cakes for everyone else. I totaled it that morning. The number was larger than I expected. Not because I hadn't known I'd spent it. I'd written down every figure, but because seeing it all in one column made it real in a way it hadn't been before. All that love, unnamed, unthanked, assumed to flow naturally and indefinitely like water from a tap. I wrote 2 lines at the bottom of the page. What I've given. What I no longer owe. Then I closed the notebook and finished my coffee before anyone came downstairs. I want to say something fair about my children. Because fairness is something I still believe in, even when it costs me. My daughter is capable. She built a career from scratch, and she knows how to get things done. When she was small, she used to bring me dandelions from the yard, with both hands outstretched, solemnly, like an offering. She had a serious face, and she laughed at the wrong moments in movies. And I loved her exactly as she was. I still love her. But love and entitlement are two different things, and somewhere along the way she began treating my patience like a resource she had permanent rights to. My son is gentler, but he follows. He follows his wife, his sister, whatever voice is most certain in the room. That's not entirely a fault. He's kind, and kindness is underrated. But kindness without attention is just comfort dressed up. He was comfortable, and I kept making it easy for him to stay that way. The Monday after they went home, I drove to the bank. The account manager was a woman named Janet, somewhere in her 50s, clear-eyed, unhurried. She pushed her glasses up with one finger and listened while I explained what I needed. I want to cancel all recurring transfers connected to the family accounts, I said. Everything on this list. She looked at the list, looked at me. All of them? All of them, effective immediately. There were 9 transfers. My daughter's supplemental car payment that I'd begun covering 2 years ago when she said things were tight and never revisited. My son's family dental plan, which I'd added them to on my own policies and simply never removed. My grandson's tutoring subscription, which I'd signed up for after a single phone call, where my daughter mentioned he was struggling in math. Mentioned it to me the way you mention a problem to the person who fixes things. Would you like to redirect any of these? Janet asked. A new account, a charitable fund? I thought about my neighbor Bess. She'd lived 3 houses down for 20 years, widowed at 54, no children. She kept the neatest garden on the street and never asked for anything. When I had knee surgery 2 years ago, she showed up every afternoon for a week with something hot in a container. She didn't ask what I needed, she just came. Yes, I said. I'd like to set up a small annual distribution for a friend. I gave her Bess's name. Janet wrote it down without blinking. We spent 40 minutes on the paperwork. I signed everything in full, every letter deliberate. The same handwriting I'd used on 30 years of checks and permission slips and sympathy cards and birthday notes that were never quite acknowledged enough to mention. Outside, the November air was sharp. I stood on the sidewalk and let it hit me. Then I walked 2 blocks to the law office. The lawyer who had handled my husband's estate had retired. His former colleague, a woman named Cynthia, calm and precise, the kind who hears everything and reacts to nothing, had taken on his files. I liked her within the first 5 minutes. I need to update my will, I said. Of course, she folded her hands. What changes did you have in mind? I removed my children, the house, the accounts, the investment portfolio I'd been building steadily for 2 decades, on a librarian's salary and careful habits. All of it redirected. Half to a scholarship fund at the elementary school where I'd spent my career, for children who needed books they couldn't afford to buy. Half to Bess. Cynthia's eyebrows lifted slightly, the neighbor. She remembered I was a person, I said. That's worth something. We were finished in an hour. I shook her hand, stepped out into the cold, and walked to the diner down the street. I ordered a slice of lemon meringue pie and a cup of real coffee, and I sat by the window and ate the whole thing slowly, without rushing, without checking my phone. I had not had lemon meringue pie in 4 years. No particular reason. I'd just gotten out of the habit of asking for what I liked. Thanksgiving itself, I had already made other plans. I called Bess the week before. Would you come for dinner? Just the 2 of us. I'm making what I want this year. What are you making? She asked. Sweet potato casserole the real way, with marshmallows on top. A small turkey, lemon meringue pie. A pause. I'll bring biscuits, she said. I set the table for 2, with my good dishes. The ones I kept for company while using the chipped everyday set myself, year after year, because guests deserved the good dishes, and I was the one doing the work. I used them for Zess and me. I put on a record. Something with piano and no words, and cooked for most of the afternoon, without anyone's dietary restrictions posted on the refrigerator, without a list of substitutions, without planning anything around anyone's preferences but my own. At 4 o'clock, Bess arrived in a deep green coat with a covered dish and her unhurried way of being in a room. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I had expected it. That's the thing about people who take you for granted. They don't call ahead because they assume you'll be there. There, always ready, the oven always on, the door always open for them and not for you. My daughter stood on the porch, my son and his wife behind her and their 2 kids. My granddaughter, Izzy, 17, quiet, watchful, stood slightly apart from the rest, and she was the only one who looked at my face when I opened the door instead of looking past me into the house. We were in the area, my daughter said, smiling. They lived 40 minutes away. I have company, I said. Her smile held in that particular way it does when she's recalibrating. Oh, we won't stay long. We just thought, since it's Thanksgiving. I know what day it is, I said. Silence. Mom, my son said quietly, we drove all this way. I looked at him, at my daughter, at his wife who had called me she and her in 20 years of family conversation and had never once, not once, used my name. There's a diner on Route 9 that does a Thanksgiving plate, I said. Pie included. I hear it's good. I said it gently. There was no satisfaction in cruelty, and this wasn't cruelty. It was just honesty, finally, without apology. I stepped back from the doorway and closed the door. I stood in the hall and listened. My daughter's voice rose and fell. My son said something short. Footsteps on the porch steps, then quiet. I walked back to the kitchen. Bess looked up from the bread she'd been slicing. Everything all right? Yes, I said, and I meant it. We ate for 2 hours, slowly. The turkey was exactly right. The sweet potatoes were what they were supposed to be. Too rich, too sweet. The kind of thing my mother made and I'd stopped making because no one else wanted it. Bess's biscuits came apart in layers. We talked about her garden, about a book we'd both read, about a trip she'd been thinking of taking. Nova Scotia, she said. In May, maybe. Have you ever been? No, but I've wanted to. She looked at me across the table. We could go together. I thought of the airline miles I'd been saving in an account for years, meaning to use them for something, and never settling on what. I thought of May and the coast and the kind of trip you take, not because you have somewhere to be, but because the world is still there and so are you. Yes, I said, let's do that. She raised her water glass. I raised mine. My granddaughter Izzy called the next morning, from her own phone, not her father's. Could she come over? Alone? She arrived with a bag of clementines and the look of someone who had been awake most of the night. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands around her mug of tea. And I noticed she had her grandfather's way of going still when she had something important to say. I heard them on the drive home, she said. Dad said he'd talk to you in a few weeks when things calmed down. Mom said wait and see. Aunt Kristen said, she stopped. She said you were being dramatic. The word arrived quietly. I'd heard it before in various forms. Difficult, sensitive. She takes things too personally. What did you say? I asked. She looked up. I said that a woman who pays for everything and gets turned away from her own door on Thanksgiving isn't being dramatic. She's finally paying attention. I looked at my granddaughter for a long moment. This girl I'd taken to the library every summer since she was 4. Who had her grandfather's eyes? Who had, apparently, his habit of saying the true thing without dressing it up. How did they take that? I asked. Not great, she said. She peeled a clementine in one long spiral, the way I'd taught her when she was small, and set the pieces in a ring on the table between us. We sat quietly for a while. Outside, the last of the November leaves scraped across the walk. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, I start living for myself. She nodded like that made sense, because it did. My son came 4 days later, alone, no warning, parked at the curb and sat in his car for several minutes before he got out. I watched him from the window. He walked up the path with his hands deep in his jacket pockets and his shoulders forward in that particular way. The posture of someone who knows what he's done and isn't sure how much I know. He knocked once. I opened the door. He looked older than he had at Thanksgiving, or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly. Hi, Mom. Come in. We sat at the kitchen table. He hadn't brought anything. No flowers, no food, no prepared speech. Just himself, hands flat on the table like he was bracing against something. I heard what you did at the bank, he said. I know. The transfers were mine to cancel, I said, every one of them. He was quiet. You heard us before Thanksgiving. I came back from the store early, I said. You were already in the kitchen. He closed his eyes. I don't know how to explain what we were thinking, he said finally. You were thinking I was an asset to be managed, I said, not unkindly, just plainly. A house to be sold, accounts to be divided, a problem to be solved. You forgot there was a person underneath all the practical details. He opened his eyes. They were red at the edges. I've been invisible to this family for a long time, I said. I paid for things no one asked me to cover and never mentioned it because I didn't want to keep score. But I kept a record. I always kept a record. I didn't know, he said quietly. How much? No, I said. You didn't look. The kettle had boiled. I got up, made 2 cups of tea, put one in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it. He looked like Izzy doing it. The same grip, the same need for something warm to hold. I'm not here to get anything back, he said. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. You're beginning to understand, I said. That's different from sorry, and it's worth more. He winced, but he didn't argue. We drank our tea. I told him about the scholarship fund, about Bess, about Nova Scotia in May. He listened without interrupting, without suggesting I reconsider, without managing me. It was the longest he had ever just listened. When he stood to leave, he said, Can I call you sometime? Not for anything, just to call. You can call, I said, but come as my son, not as someone who needs something. There's a difference. At the bottom of the porch steps, he turned back. Mom, I see you now. I looked at him for a moment. My son, who I had carried home from the hospital in a yellow blanket, who had cried at every haircut until he was 9, who used to leave interesting rocks on my pillow as a child because he thought they were beautiful and believed I would too. We'll see, I said. Then I closed the door. Not hard, just firmly, the way you close something you're finished with for the day, but might open again tomorrow. My daughter came 2 weeks later. She didn't call first. That was always her way, arrival as announcement. She stood on the porch in a long coat with her arms crossed, bracing herself against whatever she'd decided to expect. I opened the door before she knocked. She startled slightly, then composed herself. Can we talk? We sat in the living room, which felt right, more formal, more honest than the kitchen. I didn't make tea. She didn't ask for it. I've been thinking about what you must have heard, she said. I know what I heard. It was a conversation. We were just. Kristen. I said her name quietly, and the sound of it stopped her. I so rarely used it directly. I know what it was. She looked at her hands. Okay, she said. You're right. I kept this family together for 30 years, I said. Not as a figure of speech, actually. With my salary, my savings, my time, my attention. I paid for things I never mentioned because I didn't want anyone to feel guilty. But I kept track. I paused. I was the floor you all stood on, and nobody thought to look down. She was crying quietly. She didn't perform it. My daughter, when she drops her competence, is more genuine than she knows. It's one of the things I've always loved about her. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't, I said. That's the part that took me the longest to make peace with. We sat in the quiet for a while. Can I come back, she asked finally, just to visit? You can come back, I said. Come as my daughter, not as someone managing a situation. She stood. She put her arms around me, and I let her and held her for a moment. This woman, who had once been a little girl bringing me weeds from the yard like they were precious things. Then I stepped back. She left without another word. I stood at the window and watched her car pull away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt like myself, all the way through, without any part held back. December came. The neighborhood lit itself up the way it does every year. I didn't put out the wreath, I didn't string lights, or bring the boxes down from the attic. The house was just itself, warm and quiet and mine, without performance. Bess and I booked the trip on a Tuesday afternoon with a map spread between us on our kitchen table, circling places with a red pen. I used the airline miles I'd been saving for something without ever knowing what. Izzy came by on a Saturday with a library sale find. A book about a woman who walks across Scotland alone because she thought I'd want it. She was right. She looked around the kitchen when she came in. Something had changed about the room, though nothing physical was different. It was more like the room had stopped holding its breath. "You seem different," she said. "I feel different," I said. "Good different?" I thought about Janet at the bank and Cynthia at the law office. I thought about Bess's biscuits and the good dishes, and the water glasses raised over the lemon pie. I thought about the morning I'd sat by the window with real coffee and watched the street without waiting for anyone to arrive. "Yes," I said, "good different." She smiled. Her grandfather's smile, the one that meant she'd understood something she couldn't put into words yet. After she left, I sat in my chair by the front window. The light was going early, the way it does in December. The afternoon turned gold, then gray in the space of an hour. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just there, in my house, at my window, in my own life. The one I'd been quietly funding and furnishing for everyone else for 30 years, and had finally decided to live in myself. For a woman who had spent 3 decades making herself smaller and smaller just to stay included, that turned out to be enough. It turned out to be more than enough. It turned out to be everything.